What's up, everybody? I'm Jason, and welcome back to another episode of the vlog. This is episode 25, season 3. It is the episode recorded for Friday, the 20th of August, 2021. And the only thing that I'm going to be talking about today is the EOS R5 firmware update to version 1.4. Now, before I start talking about firmware 1.4 specifically, a quick note about me and firmwares. So I have downloaded it. I have not installed firmware 1.4 on my R5 yet. I am There's a very real part of me that's chomping at the bit to do it, and there's a very real part of me who is saying just sit tight for a couple of days and see what shakes out and make sure that there aren't any show-stopping bugs that other people are reporting before you do it. Now, this has nothing to do specifically with Canon and firmwares from Canon. They have had a couple of problems in some firmwares this year. They have moved very quickly to address those problems. So kudos to Canon for that. This has more to do with a long-running sort of history that I have had with firmware updates breaking things. And as I said, not specifically Canon, but over the years, I have learned to moderate my excitement for fixes and features to better support being not broken. Now, I will point out that I've had really no problems with Canon firmwares in the past. I know some people have had problems with some of the firmwares this year. There's hotly debated whether this is Canon's gone to crap or not. But my position really comes from my history with a lot of other software and technology and having things break that I really didn't want to have break, or I didn't really want to have to then go fix. So that is what it is. So I will be in this video. I'm talking primarily about what I've seen, or what's been announced and what I've been able to decipher. I will talk more about specifics, probably of actually, if there are any problems or whatever that I run into in next week's video. If I don't talk about it, I didn't run into any problems. There are a number of things that I'm very interested in, but I'm not 100% certain of when I'm going to be able to use or try out, simply because the hardware I either don't have, won't be getting anytime soon, or I'm not interested in purchasing it at all as that goes. So let's jump into the 1.4 firmware. And we want to talk about so one thing I want to note too is there aren't necessarily clear, concise information provided around everything. I kind of had to dive around to various sources to find some of the stuff I'm seeing. So this is getting really old, and unfortunately I think this is a problem of having seriously complicated technology and equipment. uh but it's getting really hard to find a comprehensive explanation of things. So anyway, the firmware headline feature: raw over HDMI to some compatible recorders. Now, as far as I can tell right now, the only compatible recorder is the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus. That may change in the future. There's nothing to stop things from changing, at all. But the Ninja 5 Plus will be able to record up to 8K 30 frames per 8K resolution, 30 frames a second, or up to 30 frames a second, so 24, 25, or 30 frames a second at 10-bit color. Now, what the press release from Canon doesn't say about this is the raw over HDMI output also supports, or also works in movie crop mode. And in movie crop mode, you will be able to record or send a 5K resolution signal at up to 60 frames a second. So 23, 24, 29, 25, 29, or 30, 50, and 60 frames a second, depending on NTSC or PAL. And this is where Canon doesn't mention this, but according to the spec page on Atomos' site, at 12-bit color. That could be wrong. This is why I'm saying it's really complicated. It's really hard for me to find concise, complete information at in any one given place. So I don't quite yet know what the full ramifications or capabilities of raw recording are. Something I'm actually rather looking forward to. As long as if you can do the raw output without recording in camera, so simply recording on the external device, this will go a long way to addressing the thermal limitations of the R5, because essentially there's far less computational power needed to convert the raw data out of the signal or out of the camera, pack it into a HDMI bit stream and shuffle it out the port than there is to compress it and write it to a card. And then of course you have the power consumption. For example, if you're shooting raw video, you have to use a CFExpress card, so you have the power consumption of the CFExpress card on top of the added power consumption in the processor in the camera and the power consumption of the sensor. So potentially being able to shuffle 8K or 5K recording out of the camera into an external recorder, cost considerations aside, could go a long way to getting you some upgraded or some improved performance or whatever capabilities. Record time, that's what I'm looking for. Now, what I haven't looked into in any great detail yet is whether you can take the raw stream from the camera to the Atomos Ninja 5 Plus and then convert it there, and instead of doing recording as ProRes RAW, debayer it and record it as ProRes 422 or whatever for storage reasons or storage efficiencies. That's something I will have to look into. But at the moment, I don't have a Ninja 4 Plus or 5 Plus. I am looking at possibly getting a Ninja 5 Plus, but that's research that I will need/want to do in that aspect before, anything I worry about right now. So that's, I would say that's the headline feature. Added to the video capability feature set, there is now also support in the R5 for the CNE 18-80 T4.4L and CNE 70-200 T4.4L. These are both compact cinema servo lenses. They will do autofocus with the camera, the dual pixel AF in the camera. They will also do servo zoom. However, there is a limitation with these lenses that the camera cannot provide enough power for the servo zoom and autofocus to function simultaneously. So servo zoom takes priority, apparently, from what I've read in the press release, that unless you have an external power supply to the servo control unit, in which case you can do both simultaneously. Now, I don't know how relevant this is. They're not cheap lenses. I don't own them. I'm not planning on buying either of them. And quite honestly, if you're the kind of person who's using a cinema servo zoom lens on even an R5, you're probably not the kind of person that's watching me babble about the problems of solo shooters and people using low-end kit, and you'd have more than enough capability to run those lenses and provide the requirements for them. So not much I can say about that. This is, as I said earlier, there's some things that I have really no interest in. These are one of those things that I really have no interest in, down the road or at all. Next up, add simultaneous video recording on cards 1 and 2, with the exception of raw video or basically anything that can't be recorded to the SD card. So bitrate is bitrate. Bitrate, if there isn't enough bandwidth to the card, you can't simultaneously record. I could certainly see where people would be interested in this feature. It's certainly something that a lot of pro photographers are interested in or concerned about, is being able to simultaneously record to two cards so that they have a backup generated in real time in the field, etc. And this basically brings that capability to video. So I don't know how many people were asking for it, but I can see where it's definitely nice or useful to have it there. Next up, add support for Video Performance Guarantee, or VPG 400, from the CFExpress 2.0 specification. So if you're Googling Video Performance Guarantee 400 or VPG 400 right now, at least on the 19th or 20th of August 2021, you're probably going to have a hard time finding a lot of information about it. I certainly have. It appears from the information that I have found that this is essentially the CFExpress version of the V306090 video performance classes that exist with SD cards. So it's a guarantee that the card will be able to record 400 megabytes a second of data consistently across the entire card without interruption or fail. Now, I'm not sure because I can't find any technical information on this. I'm not sure why the camera would need to add support for this. Generally, with cards, it's going to be the card has to be certified that it can do the thing, and then the camera just writes to the card. But maybe that's something different with PCI or CFExpress and VPG 400 or whatever. Or maybe it's something that when the camera recognizes a VPG 400 card, it does something or can deal with something special, or not really sure. So there's an odd one. I guess it's a good thing it's being added, but I don't quite understand the ramifications of it, or for that matter, exactly what VPG 400 entails or guarantees, other than, like I said, the card can write 400 megabytes a second. The final sort of video related issue is there apparently, I had never run into this, but there apparently was an issue with the HDMI output displaying zebra stripes when the camera's screen turned off. So if you had a clean HDMI signal and you turned off the camera's screen, all of a sudden your clean HDMI signal had zebra stripes imposed on it or superimposed on it. I'm not completely... I had not heard about this issue, so not that I doubt that it existed, but I haven't heard about it. I've never, because I'd never heard about it, I'd never been able to test for it or see what exactly was going on. So I guess it's good that that's fixed, but not entirely sure what the deal is there. So the still related issues that are addressed or added or improved essentially boils down to this. Point one is that they've improved the stability with the RF428L and RF600F4L. Again, I'm not entirely sure what the issue was. I sort of have moved away from really having a ton of interest in big super telephoto lenses. This kind of actually goes back to when I rented a 600 f4 to shoot in Yellowstone, and is, amazing and impressive as the lens was from a functional standpoint, it was also huge and unwieldy and difficult, and not necessarily didn't necessarily sort of correspond to the kind of photography or kind of shooting I wanted to do. So I've sort of shied away from them. Additionally, I'm a little disappointed in Canon with the RF 400 28 604 because they didn't put a control ring on it. And the optically, it's the same as the EF versions, or the the third generation EF lenses. And it really looks like all they did was take the EF lenses, slap an RF mount on the back of it, and call it a day. As far as I can tell, they didn't change anything. And it's like one of the big characteristics of all of the RF lenses is they have a control ring on them, and they didn't add a control ring to these two lenses. So uh, at a minimum, obviously, personally, I'm not really interested in a big super telephoto lens right now, but at a minimum, even if I was, I probably would be waiting or looking for the second generation ones, to see if they ended up with a control ring. But like I said, that's a whole can of worms for me personally that just, it's not something I'm really interested in diving down. And the final bullet on the fixes and bug fixes list is that the firmware fixes an issue where there may be insufficient image stabilization on the first frame after the start of shooting. So I remember when this came out, people started talking about this. I sat down and tried to reproduce it, and I couldn't consistently reproduce it on my camera. Sometimes I would get a motion blurred frame. Sometimes I wouldn't. I wouldn't necessarily get a consistent direction of motion blur, consistent kind of motion blur. A lot of it just came down to, uh, you know, again, I'm not disputing that there was a problem, because clearly there was a lot of people that were reporting an issue, and clearly Canon has done something about the reported issue, or is claiming they did something about the reported issue. But not being able to reproduce it on my camera, at least not consistently, or not where I could say this is what's going on, it's kind of hard to talk about what exactly is the situation, or was the situation there. So that said, if it's fixed, that's great. If it's not fixed, who knows? I'm going to lean towards it's fixed. Again, this is one of the things that I intend to look at when I flash my camera again sometime next week. But even that's hard to look at because, like I said, I couldn't reproduce the issue in the first place. So if I couldn't reproduce the issue originally, uh, a fix for an issue that I can't reproduce is not really going to, uh, I'm not going to see much or see something obvious. So, it is what it is. Also, sort of on a tangent, this is the kind of thing that it feels to me like, I don't want to say we're asking for it, but it kind of comes in part and parcel with the territory. And I've had some discussions with other photographers about, well, how things were back in the day or whatever. And, sometimes I'm hesitant to, compare to back in the day, because there's so many people who will just jump on, yes, but technology has moved on. And, yeah, to a certain extent, that's true. But to a very real extent, like us as people, as human beings looking at pictures, we haven't evolved any in the 20 years that camera resolution has gone from about 16 megapixels to 60 megapixels. So, and I'm talking going from film to digital, and to modern high-res digital too. So yes, there's improvements, and I'm not saying like I want to go back to not having in-body image stabilization. I want in-body image stabilization. It is amazing. I find it's a wonderful thing to have every lens that I own image stabilized, and the RF lenses that I own, especially my 24-70, having a combination of 8 stops of shake reduction. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to a certain extent. But at the same time, we do have to realize that as we raise the bar and we make the technology better, we're also making the technology more complicated. And the more complicated it is, the more there is room for problems, uh, one way or another. And, you know, I've seen people talk about how, for example, Canon's gone to shit because they have bugs in their cameras now. And you could say that, you know, simultaneously, well, their cameras are getting less good because there's bugs and problems. But simultaneously, when I got my first real DSLR, the manual was 130 pages or something like that. And the manual, the electronic manual for the R5 is almost 1,000 pages, or right around 1,000 pages. And so, you know, that's a huge increase in complexity. Firmwares for cameras like the 40D or the 1D Mark III were 5 or 6 meg. Firmwares for the R5 are 70 meg. Uh, Obviously, there is a lot more code going into the code base for the camera, just to make all of this complexity and capabilities happen. So while I, like everyone else, would absolutely love to have a completely bug-free experience and never have to worry about bugs in the camera, or bugs in the firmware, or bugs in whatever, uh, I also realize, especially from having written software where the code base has spiraled into thousands and thousands of lines, that that bugs happen, and the more complex something is, there is no foolproof technique to eliminate bugs and problems in complexity. So the real answer is, or not answer, but the real question is how timely does Canon respond to fixing things when they're reported or when they can be reproduced? Which brings me to the thing that I have reported to Canon as a bug, that there is no mention of it being fixed, and I'm not sure if they're doing anything about it, because I don't know if anybody else is reporting it as a bug. But that is the lens retract on power off custom function. I just did a video about it with the R5. I think it was tip 13 or 12 or something like that. The idea here is that extending lenses are supposed to be overall extending lenses are subject to potentially being damaged if you push the inner lens barrel in instead of allowing the autofocus motor to drive it. And this is especially an issue with STM lenses, where it's focused by wire. There's no clutch or anything to disconnect the focus motor and gear train from the actual lens element. So you can, you know, bump the lens or just push on it, and it will back drive the gear train and focus motor. Now, this custom function is supposed to protect those lenses by, with any extending lens, the lens extends as it focuses closer, so the shortest position is focusing at infinity. The custom function is supposed to look at the lens. If the lens is one of these extending types, it's supposed to focus the lens to infinity to retract it. And on Canon DSLRs, this works as advertised. Non-extending lenses do not have their focus position changed when the camera is shut off, and this is enabled. However, on the EOS R5, and I've been informed probably the RP and R6 as well, when this is set to on, all lenses get focused to infinity on power off. And as I said, I've reported this to Canon through CPS. The actual behavior is in conflict with what's happened on previous cameras, and it's in conflict with what's explained or what the manual says will happen. And there's no mention of this being fixed. Now, it could have been fixed and just not made the bullet sheet of fixes. I don't know yet. I will check this when I put the thing on, install the firmware, and report back probably next week. If I don't report back on this, then it's still an outstanding issue. So that's the big glaring thing that I found that is a bug in the camera that I haven't seen mention of being fixed. The thing that I would really like to see addressed that Canon still hasn't addressed is unlimited clip length. So I was probably mistakenly, I don't know, naively, you could call it whatever, hoping that, knowing that update was coming because Blackmagic or Atomos announced that the raw support was coming uh, when they announced the Ninja 5 Plus. Knowing that this update was coming, I was really quietly hoping that Canon would just get rid of the 30-minute clip length limit. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. Someday, hopefully, they'll do something about that, but I don't know when, and I don't know what's going to happen or how or whatever. I mean, I know I just had a survey from them recently asking if that was something that was a problem. That I responded, yes, that's a problem, and the clip length is an issue. But uh, unfortunately, gears turn slowly in corporations like this. It almost certainly is something they could flash out in, no problem on the R5, R6, R3. It'll be very interesting. I'm actually very interested to see if the R3 carries a clip length limit. Um, you know, just whether they're still going down that road or if they've just kind of realized that, it's kind of an annoyance, and it's an annoyance to the people who, in my opinion at least, it's an annoyance to the people who are the least likely or least in a position to buy a cinema camera or a dedicated professional camcorder as a replacement or to replace shooting with an R5 or something like that. So it's an annoyance to people like me. I don't want. I mean, okay, I'd love to have a C500 Mark II, but I'm not spending 16 grand on one. And then I don't know quite what I'd do with it, even if I, had one. But it's something that, like I said, I just think that I don't want to say it's time for Canon to get with the picture, because this actually would lead into, and I'm just not going to go into it this week, but what I was originally going to talk about this week was uh, who I think is really holding back the camera industry to a large extent. And, but for example, this clip length issue, I don't think necessarily is an issue for the big budget people who are possibly using these as B or C cameras or cameras that could be destroyed on a car rig, Hollywood people basically. It's a real limitation for somebody like me who's a solo shooter who's primarily a still photographer but may end up doing something like an oral history or an interview or something like that, where now I have this added, I have to keep worrying about restarting the camera thing, uh you know just because. So anyway, like I said, I really only wanted to talk about the R5 firmware update 1.4. Like I said, I'm going to be installing it probably early next week. So next weekend, if I run into problems or any really great features that weren't documented, I will be talking about them. So yeah, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Please consider smashing that like button if you found this useful or interesting. Also, please consider subscribing. As always, thanks for watching. Although I just said that, and I'll see you next time.